Good evening, and thank you all for joining us tonight to learn more about birding. I am Caitlin Sawicki, Mass Wildlife Communication and Outreach Specialist. Joining me tonight, we have Andrew Vitz, the State Ornithologist, Marion Larson, Chief of Information and Education, and Josh Gahagan, a Mass Wildlife Technician in the Northeast District. During tonight's live stream, we will chat about birding basics, such as how to ID a bird, best places to go birding in Massachusetts, and how you can easily get involved in this growing hobby with minimal gear. Keep an eye on the chat during the presentation, and we will be sharing links and resources throughout. And feel free to ask us questions by typing in the comments. We'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end, and the more questions, the better. I think most of us can agree that over the past 6 months, we have felt a little more cooped up than usual. Well, birding is a great solution to that problem. Birdwatching offers a safe way to explore the outdoors while staying local and observing local social distancing guidelines. Personally, I've always enjoyed spotting a beautiful bird, but it wasn't until recently that I became more interested in learning which birds are which. I consider myself new to the birding community, so I'll be learning from tonight's experts as well. Drew, can you please kick us off by sharing how you became interested and involved in birding?
Absolutely. Thanks, Kate. Yeah, so I'll say many birders get into birding from a very early age, say 6, 7, 8 years old. And that wasn't quite the case for me. When I was that young, when I was a young child, I was very much into butterflies. And I knew all the species in the area, and I would always be out with my net catching them. That was really my connection at a young age to the natural world. But it wasn't until I was in college that I really keyed in on birds. And I can pinpoint it to a study abroad program I took in South America that focused on ecology, and birds were a big part of it. And I learned about all the amazing South American birds and the wintering birds that are our nesting birds up here in North America that winter in South America. I was seeing those as well. And it was almost overnight that I realized that I wanted to study birds for a career path.
And Josh, what about you?
Well, ever since a very early age, I was interested in the natural world. And I wasn't so much interested in birds. I was more into the reptiles and sharks and big mammals. But it wasn't until the age of about 14 is when I first got into birds. And it was basically as simple as being bored one winter morning. And I was looking out the window at a flock of dark-eyed juncos under my bird feeder. And a couple of days later, I went out and got a field guide. And I was just amazed by the sheer number and diversity of species that we have here. And that was basically it for me. I was also getting into photography at the same time. So those two hobbies, it was a great way to mesh those two things together. And ever since then, it's just been a severe obsession for me.
And I will note that all the experts tonight, we have photos from all of them throughout the presentation, and there's some really beautiful pictures in here. Marion, what about you? What got you interested in birding?
Well, I guess I'm the aberration. I think I've been watching birds my whole life. My earliest memories are of my dad, who was a wildlife biologist, so I'm a victim of my genes. But he and my mom banded birds when I was very young. That's one of my first memories. And we had bird feeders and looked at them at the, out the window that way. But really concentrating more on birding happened when I was a teenager too, when an older lady that was taking my mom out on birding trips invited me to get up at 5 in the morning on a Saturday and travel the Connecticut River Valley and see what birds there were. And I met birders and ended up finding out that some of my high school friends liked birds. So even to this day, there are certain places in the Connecticut River Valley that I'll drive by and remember that's where I saw that northern shoveler, or here's my first bluebird sighting area. And I'm still obsessed. I have the binoculars, and I've taught my husband about birding, and we just have the binoculars at the ready, whether we're at home or traveling, wherever. You can do birding just about anywhere.
Awesome. It's good to know how everyone got started. Hold on. Yeah. To get started birding, here are some examples of field guides. I'll let Marion kind of walk you through some of these, and she can give us some more information.
So field guides are a great resource for identifying birds, and there are hard copy field guides and there are digital ones. And I know that Kate's going to talk a little bit about the digital end of things, but in the upper left, you will see the Eastern Guide to Birds from the Peterson Guide series, and then the National Geographic Birds of North America. There's also a guide that neither Drew or I have in our hands that is the Eastern Guide, and we recommend that you go for something like the Eastern Guides because you don't want to be faced with that many more pages of birds from all over the country when you're trying to figure out what's going on. You know, on the right next to the field guides are a couple of guides to finding birds in Massachusetts. The green one is about birding areas in eastern Massachusetts, and the other one is the Western Massachusetts bird finding guide, and gives you lots of great information and good directions on places to go and what kind of habitats they're in. And then at the bottom is just a few checklists. Some birders keep lists of the birds that they've seen their whole life. Some of them have year lists. Some of them have here's the list of birds that I've seen from my house. And at some nature areas and parks actually have checklists for their birds, the birds that you can see there, which is really helpful because then you can really narrow things down. And when I'm traveling to another part of the country, I really pick those up because then I don't have to figure out how many flycatchers really do I have to worry about because these are common here.
Okay. So often when you're birding, you might hear a bird before you actually see it. So IDing birds through songs and calls. Josh, can you tell us a little bit more about these tools?
Yeah, so it's very helpful to be able to learn some songs and calls. I know it's very intimidating at first because not only do you have to learn what they look like and identify them that way, but never mind trying to figure out what bird is calling. It can be very intimidating. One thing I would say is to just focus small at first and maybe some more common birds that are hanging out in your yard and become comfortable with their songs and then work out from there as you move on. There's so many different options that you can use nowadays. There's certain websites, there's CDs that have bird songs. Of course, nowadays we have apps on our phone. The one pictured on the right-hand side is one of those examples. It's the Sibley Birds app. And not only does it have pictures of all the birds and their range maps, but it has a separate tab with audio recordings for each species in that app. So you can easily pick any bird that you're interested in, play its song, play its call, and that way you can become more familiar with that species. One way that I really got to learn early on was I used the Birding by Ear CD that you see on the top left. And it basically takes birds and their voices and groups them together, how they sound, like similar sounding birds. And it teaches you how to differentiate between similar characteristics, such as like a chipping sparrow and a pine warbler. They both have very similar trilling calls, but it'll teach you similar but very distinct things that are different that you can focus on. So I would definitely recommend, if you're very interested in learning about IDing birds from their calls, to possibly pick up one of those CDs, because it was definitely a big help for me and a couple other people that I know as well.
Cool. And tonight we're going to share a few different bird calls as well, so you can try to guess what they might be. Another useful and easy tool for IDing birds is smartphone apps, like Josh mentioned. Being new to birding, I have found that a really easy app for me to use is the Merlin Bird ID. You can start using this app without having an account or anything like that, so you don't have to worry about signing up for anything. You simply choose a bird pack, and the best one for the area is the U.S. Northeast bird pack, but you can download as many as one if you are traveling and want to see birds in other areas. So starting a bird ID with this app is really easy. You answer these 5 questions. Where did you see the bird? When did you see the bird? what the size of the bird is, and it will give you size references there. So it's really easy to kind of pinpoint what the size of the bird is. And then what the main colors were, and you can select 1 to 3 colors. And then it'll ask what the bird was doing. Was it sitting on a branch? Was it in a bush? There's a couple different options for questions there. And then after you answer all the questions, the app will give you a list of possible birds and include photos so you can properly ID which bird you are trying to ID. And it will also give you all their calls and their songs that you can listen to, and then it kind of gives you a map of where you might see them. So it gives you a lot of information about that bird. And another way you can ID birds with the same app is by taking a photo of them. So it's easier to probably take the photo and then use the app later, so you're not kind of rushing yourself. But you can choose a photo from your album and then just confirm the location. And again, it'll give you a list of possible birds and you can confirm which one. So it's very easy to use. And then another thing you can do with this same app is explore birds in your area. So this is helpful for before you go out, you can kind of see what birds you might be running into, and you can kind of set yourself up with a checklist of things you might want to look for. Additional apps to use are eBird and iNaturalist, which are similar, where people will share where they observed a bird in the location. So it kind of gives you a goal when you're going out there. I have found that the eBird and iNaturalist are easier for me to use on a desktop, but we encourage you to check out all the different bird apps and find which one is best for you. So why is Massachusetts a great place to go birding? I think I will let our state ornithologist handle this question. Drew?
Great. Yes, we live in a very good state for birding, so fortunate for us. In total, just to give you an idea, there have been over 500 documented species of birds in the state. Some of those are just rarities, but that's a lot of species. In addition, we have just over 200 species that are regular nesters in the state. So even if you're just out during the nesting season, obviously during migration, you get an influx of birds, but even just during the summer when the birds are nesting, over 200 species. That's pretty incredible for a small state like Massachusetts. In addition, we've got, it's an especially good state to be in to get into birding because we have such a large and active birding community. Lots of bird clubs distributed throughout the state, so over 15 bird clubs. So wherever you live, you'll be able to look up a relatively local bird club that you could join and get information from those people. In addition, Mass Audubon has sanctuaries across the state, and they often have birding programs as well associated with each sanctuary, and their staff are very familiar with birds. So we have really great resources to help you, if you're a beginning birder, to help you get into it, to help build your skills. But really, what makes us such an incredible place for birds is the habitat types that we have. So again, despite being a small state, you can cross the state by car in a couple of hours, but there are a tremendous number of habitats that you can encounter within a short drive. So some of those, just talking about some of the habitats that with lots of birds, certainly our coastline, and our coastline has many different habitats within it. So we all are familiar with the sandy beaches of the Cape and some other areas throughout the coast, and those are great for lots of our beach birds. Think plovers and terns. The rocky coastlines are good for a whole another set of birds. We'll be talking about some of those later in the program. And then there's the salt marshes and other coastal habitats, the open water. Each habitat is suited for different species. So the coastal Massachusetts has a tremendous diversity of birds, but most of our state is actually in forest. About 60% of Massachusetts is forest covered. And, just like our coastline, there are lots of different types of forests in Massachusetts. So each type of forest has different kinds of birds. We have deciduous forests. We have the pine forests of the Cape and the Southeast. We have mixed forests of deciduous and pine. We have high elevation forests, like say if you go up to Mount Greylock at 3,500 feet, you're going to get species there that aren't anywhere else in the state. We have different forest ages provide habitat for different species. So young forests that are regenerating from a disturbance, whether it be natural disturbance or anthropogenically caused or human caused, it's going to provide habitat for shrubland species. And mature forest is going to provide habitat for a whole different set of species. In addition to forests, we have not a ton of them, but we do have native grasslands out there. And again, you get a whole new suite of birds, and we'll be talking about some of those, and wetlands as well, a number of different kinds of wetlands in the state. So lots of different habitats to explore.
So as Drew just explained, there's a wide variety of different landscapes and habitats, and they're all right in your own backyard because we have homes all over the state. Obviously, everyone can find kind of something different what their backyard might look like. So I'm going to play a quick clip of a bird that is common in many backyards. So I want you to take a listen, and you can try to guess what the bird is by typing in the comments. Here we go. Okay, so again, that's a bird that probably most of us have seen in our backyards. And if you guessed the Massachusetts state bird, the black-capped chickadee, then you guessed correct. Marion, can you tell us a little bit more about chickadees and other common birds that we might see in our backyards?
That would be great to do that. I'd like to first point out that the chickadee is also the state bird of Maine. Of course, Maine used to be part of Massachusetts, so it's all one of a bird of a feather. And it's a namesayer. It says its name. It's saying chickadee-dee-dee, chickadee-dee-dee. The males and the females both look alike. You can't tell them apart by looking at them. And they do have another whistle that you'll start to hear in late February, even though it's dark and dreary and cold, saying something like spring soon, spring soon. And they're a fun bird to see. They're so common, but I always get a lot of enjoyment watching them hopping around and scolding and flitting about. So on to the next one. We've got this very colorful common bird, really cool, unusual view of a blue jay. And this is a bird that a lot of people discover and are just amazed by the color and the flashiness of this critter. They too look alike. The males and the females look alike. And a lot of times when you notice a blue jay, you notice it by its very raucous call. And then you look around and it'll come swooping in. This is a favorite of a lot of folks, the ruby-throated hummingbird. And this is the male with the ruby throat, iridescent that sometimes it almost looks black because of the lighting. The female does not have the ruby throat. It has a pale under its chin where you can see the ruby throat on this bird. And it's also a little bit paler down the belly, and it's green. The green wings and body is not quite as bright because she needs to be a bit more camouflaged while sitting on the nest and dealing with egg laying. All right. Proof positive that you can see an endangered species and the fastest critter on Earth in cities. Peregrine Falcon, which has made a big comeback here in Massachusetts. Drew, we're up to over, what, 40 pairs in Massachusetts now?
Yeah, about 45.
Yeah, and most of them are living in the cities because some of them started to learn about cities as a place to go on buildings that are like cliffs where they historically nested. And you can be in Boston, Worcester, Lowell, Lawrence, Fall River, Springfield, Taunton. There are birds nesting there. There are people that are helping us watch where those birds are. And they're eating the pigeons and the sparrows and the starlings and of course a whole lot of other birds. They actually catch the birds on the wing. They're not going after things on the ground. They're catching other flying birds. Very cool. And then we have the other state bird. This is the wild turkey is our state game bird. And this bird, the one with the fantail, is strutting his stuff, showing that he looks pretty good to the hens. Sometimes they pay attention, sometimes they don't. Turkeys were wiped out in the 1850s. And when we and other partners were able to get them restored, no one realized that turkeys would not only just be hanging out in rural areas, but they are quite happy in suburbs. And we certainly have gotten our share of reports of turkeys strutting around in the major cities in Massachusetts. Who would have thought that some birds, big birds like that, would be around? Most people know this one, the Cardinal, and here we've got a great example of both the male, the bright red, on one side, and the female on the other. And they're year-round birds. They live, they do not migrate, even though I sometimes think they look kind of tropical with that bright color. And they're something that you'll see in lots of places, both in the suburbs as well as cities and rural areas. Last but not least, a bird that a lot of people really enjoy is the eastern bluebird. Many people look upon the bluebird as a sign of spring. Oh, I saw a bluebird. It's just returning, so spring must be starting. And there are definitely bluebirds that migrate from Massachusetts, but as Drew and I can tell you, we see bluebirds outside our office window in Westboro every month of the year. And to see the male flying across the white snow fields is just, it's like a piece of sky zipping through the area. And the female is well, actually, is that a juvenile, Josh? That's your picture, right?
No, I believe that's a female.
Okay.
Pretty sure.
You can see again a lot drabber because she's got to be a bit more camouflage, being responsible for sitting tight on the nest. But you know, those are some of the kinds of birds that you can see. This particular bird you're going to see more in the areas that are open and have meadows or edges along meadows. They're not a forest cover kind of bird. So those are some common ones.
All right, thanks, Marion. I'm going to talk about attracting birds to your yard. As chance would have it, though, we do have a thunderstorm that just decided to move in. So if for some reason I lose power, I will try to reconnect. But clearly, from what Marion was sharing there with those slides, there are many birds, many species of birds in the neighborhood. But you know, how can you bring them to your yard? And I'd say that, you know, many people use bird feeders and bird seed to attract birds to their yard. And that's not actually something we recommend. There are lots of potential negative consequences of bird feeders and bird seed, especially from spring through fall, that we try to promote other ways to attract birds. And fortunately, there are other ways. But just to get to some of those, you know, the negative consequences that I mentioned, you know, you can attract nuisance animals with bird seed. You almost always do at some level. If you live in central or western Mass, bears are a big issue. Even if you live in eastern Mass, bears are increasing throughout the state and moving into new areas. So even if you don't think you're in bear country, you know, that may not be actually the case. In addition to bears, there are, you know, it attracts lots of rodents like mice and other critters. So you have to be a little bit careful around birdseed. We actually promote, you know, attracting birds and using other mechanisms. And some of the best ways are to provide native vegetation. So native vegetation, what I mean are native plants, trees, shrubs, flowers. These provide a tremendous amount of food resources for birds, much more than non-native species. And that's well documented by entomologists and people and botanists. That the native plants are much better for native wildlife than non-native species. So the more native plants you incorporate into your gardens, into your property, the better that place is going to be for wildlife and for birds in particular. Some species that pop into mind in terms of, what might you want to promote in your yards are, the dogwoods, things with berries on them, black cherry, any of the cherries, black-eyed Susans can be good for things like goldfinches. There's a lot of online resources that you can look into if that's something of interest. Something else you can do, and you might see more immediate results with this, is to provide a water resource. So birds are attracted to water for two reasons. One, they bathe regularly in it, and some of them you'll see drinking water. Often birds get water from their food resources, whether it be insects or fruit, but you also see them drinking water from a bird bath. The picture there in the bottom right is actually the bird bath I have in my yard. It's a stone bird bath. It's been absolutely phenomenal for attracting birds. I'd say it's best. It does its best job in the later summer months and early fall, when we have lots of little mixed species flocks moving around. I don't only get the bird feeder birds, your chickadees, titmice. They come several times a day, but they bring a lot of other species in with them. So I get lots of warblers in there, species that you'd never get at a bird feeder, but I'm getting them right at my bird bath. This picture was taken from inside my house, the bottom right one, of a Canada warbler. Actually, the only time I've seen a Canada warbler on my property. So that was pretty cool. I'm no longer surprised when unusual species turn up. But I'd say, if you're going to do one thing to promote birds in your yard, put out a water resource for them, like a bird bath. They respond very quickly to it, and you'll be amazed. Next.
All right. So once you're feeling more confident with the birds you're seeing around your neighborhood, it's exciting to be able to go out and beyond and explore more of the habitats that we kind of talked about that we can find around Massachusetts. And one of those habitats that we talked about is forests. So forest birds, I'm going to play another call for you guys, see if you can guess what it is. I think this was the best one. Play that again real quick, just so it's quick. Okay. I don't know if anybody wants to take a guess of what that is, what that bird was. Again, it's a bird that you find in the forest, and it is the barred owl. Drew, do you want to take over talking more about forest birds?
Absolutely, yeah. So barred owl, that's our most common owl. Most people think, you don't really see owls, right? They're nocturnal. Partly true, but the barred owl is somewhat of an exception. It's often active during the day. It's often very vocal, and it's abundant throughout the state. So they're especially vocal in February, March, and April when they're nesting, but the young ones stay vocal throughout the summer and even in the fall. You hear them quite regularly. You'll hear some, they do a whole set of different calls. You'll hear them duetting. They have a monkey call. They're really fascinating to listen to. So that's one. It doesn't sound like anything else. Easy vocalization to learn, and you can often, following the call, go find the bird as well. So that's a fun one.
True. Before we leave the barred owl, let's do I'll do the call that most people will hear. Woo, 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 woo. Woo, 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 woo. Who cooks for you? Who cooks for you all?
That's good. Thank you. Yeah, that's perfect.
A question did come in that I was hoping you kind of you could talk about, and the owl is kind of a good time to talk about it, is what time of day is the best time to go birding? Owls, obviously, you might say a different time of day, but what's the best time to go to see birds?
Yeah, so by and large, the early morning hours are the best time for most birds. That's when they're most active, right at dawn. That's when in the spring and summer, that's when they spend a lot of time singing. Of course, that's pretty early in Massachusetts. In the summer months, that's 5:30. So you don't necessarily have to get out that early, but the morning hours are generally the best, followed by the evening hours. The midday hours usually not quite as good. Birds get kind of quiet, and they rest more during that time.
And someone was asking specifically what happened to the owls in the Lunenburg area. she said they said I would hear them every night, and they don't hear them anymore. Do we know if there's any update on the owls from that area?
Yeah, nothing in particular. You know, local populations can change a lot over time. So I assume it's, you know, something that's going on locally, or maybe by chance that's happening locally that they're picking up on. But owls, by and large, have, you know, their populations have, especially things like barred and horned owls, they're stable populations. Not a big concern in terms of if you're not hearing them anymore.
Okay, we can move on from the owls now, I guess.
Yeah, so just some other forest birds. A lot of woodpeckers are forest birds for obvious reasons. This one is Yellow-bellied Sapsucker, my favorite of the common woodpeckers here in Mass. We're kind of on the edge of their range, so as a breeding bird, we're looking more at north central and western Mass. You'll be finding them during the breeding season. Otherwise, you're looking for them more as a migrant in spring and fall. But a cool species. They have that white bar that goes down their wing, that vertical bar. That's the best way to identify them from a distance.
Okay.
Another woodpecker, the hairy woodpecker, pictured here. That's very similar to the downy woodpecker. They look almost identical. Size is a good indicator, but size can be hard to tell when you have nothing to compare it to. So for these two species, I think the best way to determine which one is which is if you look at the bill and the bill size in relation to the length of the head. So if you were to flip that bill back 180 degrees, it is about, in this image, it's about the same size or the same length of the head, and that's the hairy woodpecker. If you were to do the same thing and it was about half the length of the head size, you'd be looking at a downy woodpecker. Next. And the pileated woodpecker. So our largest of the woodpeckers, probably most dramatic. These are always fun to see. You will get them in neighborhoods. As Massachusetts forests have matured and aged and larger cavities are becoming available, this species has proliferated. So becoming more and more common, so a good one to look for.
I love seeing those in my backyard.
And they're very loud. So if they're calling around, you will hear them. Easy call to learn again. White-breasted nuthatch, this is common, probably can be seen in just about any backyard in the state. They are a cavity nester. This picture is from my backyard at his nesting hole. So again, the importance of cavities for birds. Lots of birds are cavity nesters, not just the woodpeckers, but smaller ones like chickadees and nuthatches too. So the importance of having cavities on your property can help promote birds in the area. And here's a bird that's only around in the summertime. It's a migrant bird, winters south of our borders into Central America. And it's called the ovenbird, and it's one you hear much more often than you see. It's a bird of the mature forest. It's pretty common, one of our warblers, and so you can see it throughout Massachusetts, but you hear them much more frequently. They have a very loud teacher, teacher, teacher call. It's an easy one to learn, so if you're trying to pick up some bird songs, this one's not only common, but a very obvious song. You can quickly learn and start picking it up. Once you start hearing it, you can try to go into the woods and see if you can get a glimpse of them for yourself. And the ruffed grouse. This one is, I think most people are familiar with this bird. It's one of our larger birds for forests. They like young forest habitat. We don't have a ton of young forest habitat in Massachusetts. And partly as a result of that, this bird has declined. So they're becoming increasingly difficult to find. In the springtime, you can listen for their drumming when they're during the mating season. They make that low, thundering drumming call with their wings beating on. There you go, with their wings beating on a down log. You don't see these very often. You hear them more frequently. It's always exciting to get one of these. Young forest is the right habitat to look for. So keep an eye out for ruffed grouse.
Okay, so I am going to play another bird call for you. And if you want to take a few minutes to try to guess what it is, and then we will tell you the answer. Okay, here we go. All right. So if you want to take a second, we'll let you figure out if you can guess what it is, and then we will reveal the answer right now.
So the bird you were just hearing is called the American Woodcock. It is a member of the shorebird family, specifically a species of sandpiper. And they're pretty unique looking. They're very cryptic and very camouflaged, almost impossible to see during the daytime. But they have a very cool springtime courtship ritual, which can be a lot of fun to see and much easier to find these birds in your neighborhood. Either before sunrise or just after sunset, the males will come out and do a twittering display flight where they spiral up into the air and their wings create a very interesting twittering noise. And then they will actually come back down to the ground and go silent for a few minutes. And then when they hit the ground, they'll make that peep noise that you just heard. It's a lot of fun to go out after sunset with your family with a flashlight and to try spotting these birds. They can be pretty common, even in suburban and urban areas, wherever there are small fields with thick woods, which they like to spend most of their days in. And they're also a sure sign that spring has arrived. They'll head a little bit further south, southern United States for the wintertime, but they usually return early in spring, sometimes as early as early March. So it's a very welcome sound and sight to hear these birds every year. The song sparrow is pretty ubiquitous throughout the state. Definitely our most common sparrow. They can be found in basically any open habitat type, even in your yards, marshes, old fields, what have you. They are year-round resident, and most of the time they will spend their days skulking in the underbrush, but particularly in the early spring, they will be very conspicuous when they're singing their nice songs. It's a good one to learn. It has a lot of variability, but it has some certain structures that can be consistent, and it's a good one to learn. Bobolink is a characteristic grassland species that we have. The males, as you can see, are a striking black and white color combination to them. They can be somewhat common in the right habitat. They very much prefer hay fields more so than other types of grasslands. And they can be very busy too. The males will constantly chase each other around and chase the females and make their songs, which kind of similar to bobolink is where they got their name. A bunch of whistles and twitters and everything jumbled together. They also have one of the most spectacular migrations of any songbird in North America. They'll spend the summers here in the United States, and then every fall they migrate all the way down to Central South America. So in 1 year, they're making a round trip. They estimate about 12,000 miles, and they'll do that throughout their lifetime. It's a pretty amazing feat for such a small bird. Red-tailed hawk, definitely our most common species of raptor here. Very adaptable, as common as they are in the cities as they are out west, where you get more rural fields and forests. Take a wide variety of prey. I've watched them take earthworms and small mice, and I've even watched them take prey up to the size of ducks and rabbits. So they're very, the wide variety of prey and their ability to live in a variety of habitats make these birds very successful. They're also the bird you see most often driving on the highways. They're very easy to spot that way, particularly in the wintertime. So I'm sure you've noticed those, but they're definitely pretty much in anybody's neighborhood here in Massachusetts. Northern Harrier, which is primarily a fall and winter resident here in Massachusetts. It's another species of raptor. They are fairly unique for hawks in that they have a facial disc, kind of like an owl, which enables them to hear a lot better than most other hawks. And their hunting style is also very unique. They will fly very low over these open fields and marshes where they like to hunt, and basically listening, using that facial disc for any slight movement or rustle in the leaves below them, and can instantly swoop down and try to grab that bowl. And they have a very distinct white rump patch, which is slightly visible in that photo there, but they're very easy to find in the right habitat. And And last but not least, the American Kestrel, which is North America's smallest falcon, also the prettiest falcon, I'd have to say. They are pretty unique in that they are cavity nesters for raptors. So between the loss of habitat for grasslands and the lack of cavities, they've been going through some declines over the years. But one way that you can improve the likelihood of having kestrels in the area is they will actually accept nest boxes specifically made for them. And Mass Wildlife has been doing their best to install these boxes throughout our properties and even private properties throughout the state in suitable habitat. And thankfully, these birds seem to enjoy those, and they will gladly take over these boxes, which is nice.
Thank you, Josh. I'm going to play another bird call now, and this one is definitely one of my favorites. So I'll play it and give you a second to guess, and then I'll let Marion take over, revealing what bird it is. Okay, Marion?
All right. Well, the answer is the bird on Golden Pond, the common loon, which is, though it's called the common loon, it is listed under the Massachusetts Endangered Species Act. But it's a gorgeous bird, and it's got an amazing call. Most of the time, in most of the loons that are actually nesting here in Massachusetts are in the central part of the state, the Quabbin Reservoir and the Wachusett Reservoir, and northern Worcester County is kind of the core of the nesting population, but Mass Wildlife is working with some other groups to restore them in some other parts of the state where they used to be. Down in the southeast, we just had our first loon hatch in over 100 years this summer as part of that restoration effort. And we're hoping to be able to do something out in the Berkshires. The wood duck, this is our most colorful duck. I think it looks so exotic. I wonder how it even makes it here in North America. This is a male. The female is rather drab and brown, but she's got to camouflage herself. The wood duck, many people may be familiar with it and think that it's pretty common, but you may not have known it nearly got wiped out in the 1930s. And nest boxes came to the rescue, where Mass Wildlife figured out a design that the wood duck would accept, and we figured out where to put them, and lots of people, scouts, sportsmen, birders, put up a lot of wood duck boxes, and that brought them back to their abundance they have now. The last bird is what I like to call the bandit bird. It's the common yellowthroat, and I think they are cute little guys. These guys go hopping around in the shrubs, and they will come to you if you do something like psh, 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 psh. They'll come around and look to see what's going on. This is a male. The female does not have the black mask. She'll just have that yellow, and she'll be a little bit drabber yellow-green.
Thank you, Marion. Our last section of birds is birds that you find on the coast. And I just want to share a little note that all the bird calls that I've been doing them through the Merlin Bird ID. So it's a great app to use to help with the calls as well. And let me play this last call, and then Drew will take over. Probably sounds pretty familiar to a lot of you. Drew?
All right. So, our great coastline, we see a lot of gulls. So we have 4 species of gulls that you regularly see in Massachusetts. Largely, it's the 2 on the right. Those are both our larger gull species, the great blackback, which has that nice black back, so easy to identify, and the herring gull, which is just a little bit smaller than the great blackback, but also a very large gull, and it has the light gray back. In the wintertime, we get a lot of ring-billed gulls. So that's the one in the top left-hand corner. And it's got that nice ring on its beak, at the end of its beak. They're a smaller gull. And increasingly, we're starting to see laughing gulls. So we're right at the very northern edge of the range for laughing gull. If you do head to coastal areas south of us in the mid-Atlantic or southeastern states, laughing gull is probably the most common gull you're going to see. For us, we're just starting to get them as a nesting bird, and they're becoming more common during the summertime. So there are a lot of people don't try to identify the gulls, but really put in a little effort. You'll be able to identify a bunch of them, focus on the first 3 species, and then keep laughing gull on the back of your head as well. If you go to the rocky areas, the best place for this bird, the Harlequin duck, is in the wintertime off of Cape Ann. So very dramatic duck, really fun to watch foraging. They'll come in close to the shore, so you can get often good photographs or looks through binoculars at them. Beautiful duck, Harlequin duck, only around in the wintertime. Common eiders, these are becoming increasingly common throughout Massachusetts. They were introduced to the state in the Buzzards Bay area in the 70s, and they've expanded since then. The male is the one in the foreground with that dramatic black and white plumage, the female behind it with just the brown plumage. A large sea duck around all year these days, so you can find these. Cape Cod Canal is a great spot to find these. Cool bird to watch. Piping plover. So Massachusetts, we're of any bird, we're especially well known in the conservation community for piping plovers. We've done a fabulous job of conservation of this species and restoring them throughout the state. Massachusetts has more nesting piping plovers than any other state in the country. This year, we were up around 800 pairs, so really incredible. Wow. You can even find them on urban beaches around Boston. They're especially common on the Cape and any place with large sandy beaches. Cool bird to look for in the summertime. In the winter, they largely migrate winter in the Bahamas. And the willet. If you get into another coastal habitat, the salt marshes, look for willet. This is a shorebird, very vocal, again, a migratory species, so they're around in the summertime. If you approach their nesting areas, they become quite obvious and vocal. So think about willets when you go to a salt marsh habitat. And one of our favorites, and a lot of people out there enjoy watching snowy owls. Massachusetts, again, another great state for snowy owls. Our large coastlines, they largely come to the coast, a grassland habitat around the coast in the wintertime. They start chilling up in November and December. Each year is a little different. Some years we have large influxes of snowy owls, other winters, just a few. But there's lots of good areas to look for snowy owls, and you want to target probably December to March to look for this species. They're active during the day, so you can get good views of them during the daylight hours.
Okay, wildlife viewing ethics. Mary, you want to tell us a little bit about the ethics?
Yeah, there's kind of a certain code of conduct that you should be thinking about when you're looking for birds that will be protective of birds, and it also takes into consideration other birders and landowners. The biggest thing is that you want to keep your distance from birds. So that you can observe their natural behaviors, and that they don't get stressed. So they do have physical distancing needs. If it changes its behavior, it's possible that you are too close, so you really need to back away. Some birds will just freeze in place, and that tempts some folks just to walk up. Well, they're freezing because they're hoping that no one will see them because they're not moving, and you may not realize that they're stressed. So again, keep your distance, be respectful of that. Also, make sure that you're not using electronic calls a lot during the breeding season, because that puts a lot of stress on birds. Leaving your pets at home is a good idea. course, some of the places that you might be going to for birding may not allow pets, but pets don't make the birding better for you. Be quiet. You see and hear more when you're quiet. It also is helpful when you've got neighbors nearby. If you're in a more residential area, open and close your doors quietly. Respect any signage and guidelines that you might find at some of your birding places. You can see the restricted area signs. Those are set up in some places that, for instance, where piping plovers are nesting. So be respectful of that. Be respectful of the landowners, whether it's public land or a land trust property or some individuals, own property. Be respectful of their property and exceed, observe the guidelines. And the other thing is, if you stay on trails or pathways, that limits the stress that you might be putting on folks. We don't recommend feeding birds. They don't need to get that close. That's not good for them. They need to know how to live on their own, and they should have a natural wariness of people. That's what keeps wild things wild.
Mm-hmm. So now that we know there are a lot of different habitats to go, and we know that how to ethically bird watch, can you guys share with us some of your favorite places to go bird watching? Josh, I'll let you kick us off.
Thanks, Kate. My favorite place to bird would probably have to be the Quabbin Reservoir, located in central Massachusetts. It's a pretty large area for Mass, over 180 miles of shoreline, well over 50,000 acres of protected forested land surrounding the reservoir. And within that land, there's a great variety of habitats. There's a lot of forestry that goes on in those forests. So not only do you get the mature pine and deciduous forest that we see throughout the state, but there's also various levels of early forest, young forest, which a lot of birds depend on. Some of them that we've already mentioned, like the grouse and the woodcock. So you can really get a lot of different songbirds as well that prefer those types of habitats. The reservoir itself, with all that water, is obviously going to be a huge attraction to a lot of different species of waterfowl, particularly in the fall through the spring, as long as there's no ice throughout the winter time. There's also a lot of loons that nest on this reservoir, and it's also a great spot to see eagles as well. And Quabbin Reservoir is actually the site where eagles were first reintroduced to the state of Massachusetts in the early 80s. They were wiped out as a breeding bird in the early part of the 19th century, or the 20th century, sorry about that. But Mass Wildlife actually created a hacking platform, which is basically a raised nesting platform, and raised chicks from, I believe it was Michigan. And that took about 6 years. And now, fast forward to today, there are over 10 pairs that nest on the reservoir itself. So it was an extremely successful reintroduction program. But eagles are present year-round, so that's a big highlight of going to the reservoir. And one of the best things I think about the Quabbin is there's so many access points available for people to explore. And I've very rarely been out and encountered other people when I've been out and birding, so that's kind of a special part about going to the Quabbin. You can really have a good sense of adventure and have the place to yourself, and it's just a beautiful area to get out and see a lot of birds while you're out there. So I would highly recommend it if you haven't been. It's a beautiful place.
And Drew, what about you? Where do you like to go birding?
Yeah, one of my favorite places is the Parker River National Wildlife Refuge. So this is on Plum Island in Newburyport. Just a really phenomenal spot for bird watching. Lots of different habitats there. The sandy beaches, the salt marsh habitat, the dunes. It's great in all times of year. So spring with returning migrants, you can get good fallouts of songbirds there, in addition to the shorebirds and water birds. Summertime is great for the nesting birds, things like some of our rare species like salt marsh sparrow and piping plover. A good species to look for here. Fall, you get huge influxes of shorebirds in the fall. And winter time, you get lots of raptors. And so it's a great spot to look for the snowy owls, short-eared owls, rough-legged hawks, the northern harrier, which was another species mentioned earlier. All of those can be pretty common at this site in the winter. So there's never a dull moment at Parker River. In addition to that, it's a great spot for beginner birders to go because there are so many birders out there. So if you drive down the main road, if there's a good bird around, there's going to be cars pulled over. So that's your cue to also pull over, ask for help. People can help you get eyes on whatever they're looking at. Great place to go for a wide diversity of species and for help with birding as well. So check it out if you haven't already.
And Marion?
So I like to go, this is not too far from where I live. I love to visit the Bolton Flats Wildlife Management Area, which is in Lancaster and Bolton. And it's very well named because it's flat. It's the floodplain of the National River and another smaller river that winds through shrubby and grassy floodplain areas. It's a very popular spot for the local birding community. And then during the seasonal migration times, you can get a whole lot of songbirds that come through. And because there's fields of various types there, you're also going to get a lot of waterfowl, a lot of ducks and geese come through there. Like most of the Mass Wildlife properties, there are unmarked paths and access ways to explore. And the water birds are especially interesting. There's an endangered species, the bittern, that you can hear making this strange, weird sort of noise. They call it pumping. and you definitely want to bring knee boots during the wet times because it is a floodplain. Now, there is another part of the management area called the Pine Hill section that's upland, and that Mass Wildlife has done a lot of cutting and burning and creating more grassland, barren sort of habitat, and that is attracting a lot of those grassland birds that we talked about. Plus the whippoorwill, you can hear a lot of whippoorwills there. Oh my gosh, I was there in May. I must have heard about 5 or 6 of them in the evening. It was super. Great place for woodcock too. Well, now we're going to move into where can you look for birds on Mass Wildlife lands. There are over 200,000 acres that we own, and you can go all over the state to find some great places to bird. If you just type in Wildlife Lands Viewer Massachusetts into a browser, you'll come to our interactive map that you can zoom around down and right down to the property level, and you can click on the property blob and get the fact sheet that pops up and tells you about the habitats and some of the opportunities that are available there. And this is an example of what you would see for the Bolton Flats Management Area.
Awesome, thank you. So we're going to switch gears and talk about birding gear really quickly with Drew kicking us off with telling us about binoculars.
Yeah, so binoculars are the most important piece of gear that you can have. You can advance to the next slide. We'll see a few options out there. They come in all different sizes for a beginner. You generally see 8 or 10 power binoculars. So when you're looking at binoculars, they'll have certain numbers with it. It'll say 8 by 42 or 10 by 42. That first number is the magnification. So I'd recommend 8 power for a beginner. As you get more advanced, people often go up to 10 power. It just gives them a little bit more, a little closer of a view. But the 8 power, you get a bigger field of view, so it's easier to find the bird out in the environment. The second number is the size of the objective lens, the outer lens. So that's how much light's getting let in. 42 is a good number. You'll see sometimes 8 by 35. But I recommend the 8 by 42 or the 10 by 42. But lots of options out there. They run from $30 to $3,000. You can get a lot of good pairs for just about the $50 to $100 range. You can get a decent pair to start out with. Lots of online resources to check out and to explore options.
And as far as photography, it can be a great way to enhance your birding experience. There's also a lot of options online that'll cover this, so I just want to touch it very briefly. But basically, I would just firstly look at an entry-level camera, whether it's a point and shoot or a DSLR in a mirrorless system. Basically comes down to the quality of the photos you're hoping to capture, and also how much weight you want to carry around with you. Obviously, a point and shoot is going to be a lot lighter. You can put it in a pocket, whereas a DSLR has a lot more features, but it's a bit more bulky. More importantly than a camera, though, I would suggest looking to invest more into a lens. Higher quality lens will definitely improve your images greatly in the end. And as far as the focal length, I would say minimum 300 millimeter to 400 millimeter to start off. It can be light enough to carry around easily, but long enough as well to zoom in on most birds. And teleconverters are also a great way to enhance your magnification for a cheap price and a light tool to have around as well. They usually come in 1.4 and 2x varieties, but basically you just stick that on the lens and the camera, and it magnifies your lens by that amount, and it's very handy to have. They also come in zoom lenses, but it basically depends on what you're looking for. And lastly, I would just consider to look into used gear, especially for cameras, because as camera manufacturers come out with new brands, you can get a much cheaper camera before that was originally several $1,000s new. You can usually pick it up for under $1,000 to a few $100s. And eBay, or there's other sites that work for that, but I would definitely consider used gear for a beginning birder specifically.
And the other part of gear is your clothing. We recommend that you dress for the weather, of course, whatever's going to be going on out there, with good sturdy hiking boots or shoes. In the fall, and since this is hunting season as we're recording this, we suggest that you wear a blaze orange vest or a cap, because then you'll be visible to hunters who are mostly off trail, but really appreciate seeing you, just like a driver does appreciate seeing reflective gear on people walking on roads at night. But that's something to think about, is during the hunting seasons to have that out there. But birders and hunters and bikers and dog walkers all can share the land, and just being safe and being prepared for the weather is the best thing. There's no such thing as bad weather, just bad clothing choices.
Thank you, Marion, and thank you, Josh and Drew, for joining us and sharing your birding knowledge. We have another birding live stream coming up on October 29th, and this will be with Mark and Marsha Wilson. They are the owners of Eyes on Owls, and they will be showing up live owls. So you never know what will happen, and we hope you will join us. Thank you.